There's a million reasons not to be in Egypt right now. To tell you the truth, I was scared. The crash, the horror, the tragedy. I saw it with my eyes open. We were not just sitting still. Then you start to see how high you're getting and you're like, whoa, I know for sure something happened there. And when you go inside of the pyramid, there's nothing. It was hot. What is the real world? I don't even know. What's up, guys? Welcome back. I'm gonna give you an entire recap on what went down in Egypt. My mind takes me all the way to the worst ending: conflict, war, danger, fear. Sailing the Nile for 5 days and 4 nights. Like, what even is life? Floating in the air in a basket, just floating through the air. They don't really believe that the Great Pyramid was a tomb. They were using it to channel energy. Elon Musk once tweeted, "Aliens built the pyramids. No human could have ever built this structure." The Great Pyramid's latitude, coincidentally, the same as the speed of light? Question mark? What the We were accessing a dimension beyond the 3D. It truly felt like you were levitating. It doesn't feel totally real. Could the pyramids have been built by the... What's up, guys? Welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited for today's episode because I'm going to give you an entire recap on what actually went down in Egypt. So for those of you that don't know, I recently went on an 11-day pilgrimage through ancient Egypt, and it was a wild experience, to say the least. So I'm really excited to share the highlights with you. I believe we're going to split this up into 2 parts because there's just so much to share, and I've been doing my best to get really organized with everything, and I have notes like scattered all through my notes app, and I wanted to collect even some articles and some things to just kind of bolster and add to what I'm going to share with you. So it's been kind of a process, which is why this is coming out later than I initially had expected, but it's been a process to collect all of my thoughts and everything that I experienced, and also to make sure that, you know, the information that I was learning, that I'm able to actually regurgitate it in a way to share it with you. So yeah, it's taken some time to formulate this, but I do want to say, like, this is not the history channel, so I'm not even going to try to do like an historical lesson on ancient Egypt. There is just so much information. It felt like we were drinking from a fire hose while we were there, but I am going to share with you my personal experiences, some stories of things that happened while I was there, and we're going to go deep into the mystical, the magical, the spiritual, and we're even going to throw in some conspiracy theories for some extra spice. So if you are here for that sort of thing, then stick around. You're going to really enjoy this episode. All right, so without further ado, let's get into the Egypt recap. So the trip that I went on was an 11-day pilgrimage, and it was through an organization called House of Light, and we were led by a woman, a beautiful Egyptian woman. Her name is Lara, and also one of my old business coaches, Mel Wells. She was kind of putting together the group that was going to go on this trip, but it was guided by Lara and her team at House of Light. So how I found out about the trip was through Mel, and then obviously, you know, I met Lara once we got there, and then all of the other women that came on the trip who are members of Mel's community and her inner circle and some of her clients. And so it was a really curated group of 6- and 7-figure business owners and all of the, you know, beautiful women that are part of Mel's community. So if you guys are newer to the podcast, I worked with Mel for quite a while, starting back in 2021, and she played a really fundamental role in me building my business and learning so much of what I know now as a business owner, and also in feminine leadership and just so many things. So she's always someone that I really look up to, and I owe her a lot. And it was such a beautiful way to reconnect and to go on another one of her retreats with her. I've been on several of her retreats before this, but this was very different. It definitely was not a retreat, and I figured that out real quickly. Like, it was definitely always presented as a pilgrimage, but I don't know about you, but like, I've never been on a pilgrimage before, and I didn't really know what that kind of journey entails. And it's exactly as it sounds. It's a lot deeper. It's a lot more spiritual, and it's also a lot harsher in a way. Like, the pilgrimage life is, it's little sleep, and it's a lot of emotions. It's a lot of traveling and walking and moving around. Like, it really, truly was a pilgrimage. So we started in Cairo, and then after a few days, we flew down to Luxor. And then from Luxor, we actually got on this amazing boat, and we sailed along the Nile River for 5 days to Aswan, which is in southern Egypt. And along the way, we were stopping off at different villages and to see different temples. And then after Aswan, we flew back to Cairo and we finished our journey with, the climax of the experience at the Great Pyramids and the Sphinx and everything. So yeah, I'm going to talk about some of the highlights. I'm not going to be able to cover the entire trip because there was just so much, but I am going to talk about some of the highlights. But first, I want to talk about the name of this journey because the pilgrimage itself is called Alchemy of Egypt. And Egypt's original name is actually El Kemet. L-E-L and then K-E-M-E-T, El Kemet. And that was also actually the name of our boat that we were sailing on. It was called El Kemet. So Egypt's original name was El Kemet, and it is actually thought to be the origin of the process of alchemy. And you can see how those two words kind of fit together and one could absolutely morph into the other. So El Kemet, alchemy, El Kemet, alchemy. So what is alchemy? Alchemy is a seemingly magical process of transformation, creation, or combination. There's so many different definitions of it, but some of the ones that I pulled were the understanding of the relationship between consciousness and matter, the process of taking something ordinary and turning it into something extraordinary, sometimes in a way that cannot be explained. And then there's spiritual alchemy. While physical alchemy is concerned with altering and transforming the properties within matter, spiritual alchemy is concerned with freeing your spiritual self, which is obscured within you by the unrefined parts of your ego, aka your fears, personal beliefs, self-loathing, etc. So this pilgrimage was called the Alchemy of Egypt, and the name is in and of itself just so divine because there was so much alchemy that happened on this trip. That's for sure. So just to give some overview, like some of my major highlights of this whole experience was the sunrise hot air balloon, which I'll tell you a little bit more about, my personal encounter with an Egyptian goddess, so we'll talk about that story, the throat activation inside of the Great Pyramid of Giza. That was a life-changing experience. We're going to talk about that as well. Of course, sailing the Nile for 5 days and 4 nights, like what even is life? I can't believe we did that. And the Egyptian medicine man was honestly so incredible, and the reading that I had with him was so direct and so on point, but he's the type of healer that's not afraid to tell you how it is. And so he definitely gave me some harsh truths and some things to really sit with and think about. So we will talk about that as well. But let's start with the hot air balloon. So this was very early on in the trip, and it actually wasn't supposed to happen on this day, but there was a sandstorm that was coming that was going to happen on the day we were meant to do the hot air balloon. So we had to shift it in the schedule. And so we did this really, really early on. I think it was day 2, we did the hot air balloon. And so the wake up call for this was 2:45 a.m. And we had a lot of early starts on this trip. I'm not going to lie. My sleep was averaging like 3 to 4 hours a night pretty much. So it definitely was pilgrimage life and not a relaxing restorative retreat for sure. But it was so, so worth it. So the wake up call was 2:45 a.m. We had to get up, we had to get ready, and we had to actually get on a boat. And then we were in a bus. And then we got to the place where we started watching the hot air balloons fill up. And yeah, I've never been in a hot air balloon before. So I was really excited, but I was also kind of nervous because things with heights, they kind of freak me out. Like, I'm not the girl that's going to go skydiving. You are never, trust when I say never. I know they say never say never, but you are never going to catch me bungee jumping or doing any of that crazy shit. I've done zip lining before. I've probably told you guys about it. Like, I'll do it, but I'm like scared and kind of half crying the entire time. So heights are not really my thing, I've got to say. But I was so down for this experience that I was just willing to face the fear. And I'm so glad I did. It was such a cool experience. There's really nothing like floating in the air in a basket. Like, I just kept saying, I was like, we're literally in like an Easter basket right now, just floating through the fucking air. It was the craziest thing. And you get really high in those air balloons. Like, at the start, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Ha ha ha. And then you start to see how fucking high you're getting. And you're like, whoa, like, we're in a balloon. Like, are we just going to float away? Like, how are they steering this? Like, what's the landing? Like, it was just wild. I think the thing that surprised me the most was that you don't actually feel anything. Like, you would think, filling a balloon with air and then riding in a basket that's attached to it, that it would be kind of like, there would be like movement, or it would be like rickety, or like you'd be able to feel something. But it was so stable and so sturdy. There was like no movement. It truly felt like you were levitating, like just effortlessly floating. You couldn't feel a single thing. And it was so, so quiet. Once you got way up into the sky, it was just like peace. It was beautiful. And so we were actually we were flying over the Valley of the Kings, which is the sacred like burial site for a lot of the pharaohs and the kings from ancient Egypt. And so it's this really beautiful site. It's like this, desert mountainside that has all of these tombs built into it. And the views were just insane. Also because the sun was rising over the horizon and it was just golden and glowing. It was honestly one of the most beautiful, peaceful sights I have ever seen. And I wrote an Instagram caption about my experience. So I thought I would share it here just because it kind of encapsulates all of the feels that came up for me on this journey of the hot air balloon. So it says, "You are so brave," he writes. "I'm at dinner with the girls, laughing hysterically when I glance down at my phone to read his message. My laughter instantly turns to tears. Maybe I'm overcome with emotion because I've been running on 4 hours of sleep per night for the past 3 days. Or maybe it's because I feel this truth landing so firmly in my body. Yes, I am brave. I am so brave because I know it's the only way, the hidden key to reaching the fullest potential of who I'm capable of becoming. We don't achieve nonsensical joy, wealth, and fulfillment by making moves that make sense. We do it by meeting every edge with curiosity and saying yes to all the things that make no sense to anyone else, but make perfect sense to you. By coexisting with fear and dancing with the voice of doubt. There's a million reasons not to be in Egypt right now. Conflict, war, danger, fear, money, work. There's a million reasons not to trust a random man whose intentions and training I have no knowledge of to operate a hot air balloon soaring at 3,000 feet above the desert terrain. I imagine the crash, the horror, the tragedy. My mind takes me all the way to the worst ending. And yet, I'm floating, weightless, in awe. The golden sun emerges over the horizon and a faded, almost full moon still hangs in the sky. It's the most peaceful quiet I think I've ever heard. My mind tells me stories of chaos, while my body is basking in sensations of joy and bliss. I laugh, I take photos, I say a prayer, I tell a joke. This moment is everything, all at once. We land, and I feel so grateful. I am brave, not just for today, but for everything I've ever done that has led me to this moment. I've done this dance with fear 1,000 times before, and that is why I have what I have, and I am who I am. So that kind of encapsulates how I was feeling on that day and all of the emotions that arose after that experience. It was just so beautiful. And to tell you the truth, I was really fucking scared. There were a few moments up there where I was like, I really was imagining the worst case scenario, and we were just getting higher and higher and higher, and my mind was, telling me these stories of chaos, but at the same time, everything was so beautiful, and it was just like, it was the most beautiful metaphor for life, of just like this constant duality of all of the hurt and the pain and all of the beauty and all of the joy and all of it happening always, all the time, all at once. And so yeah, that was such a highlight of the trip. So couldn't go without telling you guys about that one. But let's get into some of the mysteries and the real unfoldings, shall we? I'm ready. Okay, so in ancient Egypt, spiritual initiation would take place in the temples. And they say that every temple in Egypt reflects an aspect of the human being, and it contains a secret code that when that code is rescued, the initiated individual can access these kind of transcendental pieces of information that has been carefully guarded in each of these temples. So there were many well-known figures that were thought to be initiates of the Egyptian mysteries. And these are names that you might recognize like Plato, Jesus, Mary Magdalene, Pythagoras. Pythagoras studied philosophy, geometry, and medicine in Egypt for 22 years. When it comes to Jesus, I was so intrigued by this and I wanted to do more deeper research, but with everything that I was trying to gather for this episode, I didn't have time to do a full deep dive. But I do know that the Gospel of Matthew describes how Joseph, Mary, and Jesus went to Egypt to escape from the slaughter of the baby boys that was happening in Bethlehem under Herod the Great's rule. But it's not clear how long they stayed in Egypt and if Jesus ever returned to Egypt, but it is kind of well speculated that Jesus was one of these initiates of the Egyptian mysteries, along with Pythagoras, Plato, and some of these other, really well-known, famous figures. So essentially, the initiates were called to study and learn the Egyptian mysteries, and they were put through certain like physical and spiritual tests to transcend the limitations of being human and essentially become gods and goddesses on earth. And when I was thinking about this kind of phenomenon, or this idea, I guess, of, being able to go and be initiated through this experience that's going to help you transcend the limitations of being human, it honestly kind of reminded me of like in modern day, like a, Dr. Joe Dispenza kind of like becoming supernatural sort of thing, if you've ever read that book or heard of it. But his work in that book is all about like how common people can do the uncommon, and essentially like the path of transforming your future from the present. So anyway, I was just like, ooh, that's kind of like we're still doing this work in some way in the modern world, like transcending the limitations of humanness. But of course, with the Egyptian mysteries and the initiates, it was like way deeper. So anyway, the last step of the initiate's path was said to be inside of the Great Pyramid, held inside the King's Chamber, which is where we did our throat chakra activation ceremony at the end of our kind of initiation, at the end of our pilgrimage. We came back to Cairo, and then we went into the Great Pyramid, and we sort of completed our own like initiation on this path by having a ceremony exactly where, the initiates would typically end inside of the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza. So although this happened like towards the end of the trip, I'm going to kind of jump around and go out of order just so that the stories make a little bit more sense and there's some flow to things. So this was like definitely the climax, the apex, the ultimate like experience of ancient Egypt, and this happened at the very end of our trip. But we were able to do a private ceremony at sunset at the Great Pyramid of Giza. So no one else was around. We had the whole Giza plateau to ourselves. That the plateau is that, sandy desert area where there's the 3 pyramids there, obviously the Great Pyramid being the largest one. But so yeah, this was like after, it was probably like 7 p.m. So all the public had left. The Giza plateau is closed to the public. It's just us, which was honestly so incredible just to see the pyramid for the first time with nobody around. There's no tourists. There's no one trying to sell you anything. Like, it's peaceful. It's empty. The sun is about to set. The sky is this beautiful color, and we can take all the pictures that we want, and we're just soaking it in. And it was so beautiful. And I think that's one of the things about this experience that I feel so lucky and grateful and fortunate for, was that we had so many private visits throughout our pilgrimage. We were fortunate enough to be able to do private visits inside a lot of the sacred temples and in the Great Pyramid and to the Sphinx and to all these places that, are typically just really crowded and jam-packed with people. And because we were able to do these private visits, we were able to be like in our own little space and to really sit in silence and to go deep into these spiritual practices and open ourselves up to receive the magic from these sacred sites. Like, it just made the whole experience so special. So we arrived around 7 p.m. and we kind of had a little, time outside of the pyramid to just take it all in. And then we started our climb into the center of the pyramid. So you can actually go inside of the pyramid, and they've now, made it so that there's little lights and things inside of there, but you essentially climb through these like long tunnels. You have to crouch down because they're like, the ceilings are really low, so you can't fully stand up in there. So you are quite literally like, you're climbing, but you're crawling. So you're definitely bent over. You can't stand up straight. And we actually did this barefoot because once we got into the King's Chamber, that's where we were going to do our ceremony, and we didn't do any of our ceremonies with shoes on, just for like a respect sort of thing. We take our shoes off. So, but we had a long way to climb. It's probably like a 15 or 20 minute climb up into the King's Chamber through these like long, low ceiling corridors. You're like bent over, you're hunched down. It's hot in there also. Once you get into the King's Chamber, like, you feel like you're literally in a sauna. Like, you're in the very center of the pyramid that's been in the heat all day in the desert. Like, there's no air conditioning happening in there, obviously. It was fucking hot. I'll tell you that. Even though it was nighttime, like, it was so hot in there. Like, wow, we were sweating. So we climb through all of these, like, corridors and up all the stairs and through all the little pathways. And then we get up to the King's Chamber. And this is where we start to have our kind of like private ceremony. So we sit in a circle, we build our little altar. We've all brought, like crystals, offerings, things. We put them all down on the floor. We sit in a circle. We're all wearing white together. And it's just this really beautiful beautiful sacred space that we're holding. And Lara is guiding us through this throat activation. And they say that the Great Pyramid of Giza is on the throat chakra of the earth. And so it was the most perfect place for us to do like a throat chakra activation. And so, yeah, it was all about like speaking our truth and opening our voices and singing and vocalizing. And the sound inside of the King's Chamber in the very center of the pyramid, it was like the sound was just so beautiful in there. It echoed in a way where everyone's voice just sounded like they were a professional singer. Like we all were kind of like, oh my gosh, I can't carry a tune. Like what's going to happen when we start to vocalize in here? But we were harmonizing. We sounded beautiful. We really were just like singing songs. We were chanting. We prayed for peace together. We spoke our desires into existence. And it was so beautiful the way the sound just reverberated through the entire Great Pyramid of Giza. Like I couldn't believe that I was listening to my voice bounce off the walls of the inside of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Like what a once in a lifetime experience. Like what a pinch me moment. It was crazy. And there was actually part of the ceremony where we each got to lay inside of the sarcophagus. So the sarcophagus is what is thought to be the king's tomb. It's kind of like a giant like granite bathtub. There's no top to it. It doesn't look like a coffin. There's no top, but we all took turns and one by one we laid down inside of this sarcophagus and we allowed ourselves to vocalize, to chant, to sing, to pray, and to speak our desires into existence. And it was the most beautiful thing. The sound was crazy. It's like, you know, when you get into a really nice shower and like your voice just, it sounds like you're a professional singer. It sounds so good the way that it like rings, but then that sound would like bounce off the walls of the pyramid and just like reverberated through the whole space. It was honestly so beautiful. No words to really describe this like once in a lifetime experience. While we were in there, for me, it like I had to keep, a lot of people kept their eyes closed the entire time, but I had to keep opening my eyes because it really felt like the floor was moving. It kind of felt like we were tilting just ever so slightly, like nothing too crazy. It wasn't like I was nauseous or anything, but I did feel like we were not just sitting still. Like you could definitely tell that we were accessing a dimension beyond the 3D. Like it felt like being in a video game or some kind of like virtual reality where you can see and touch things that are real and you know that you're there, but it doesn't feel totally real. It was wild. I don't know how to, I'm sure this sounds crazy, but I don't know how to describe it. And then after that whole ceremony experience, like I started experiencing dizziness for honestly like 6 to 7 days afterwards. Like there would just be moments where it felt like I was existing between realms. It wasn't constant, but it would just come on ever so slightly and hit me. I could be doing anything. I could be eating, I could be walking, I could be having a conversation with someone. And then I would just go into this like dizzy spell where it felt like I was existing between realms. Like most of me was here, but there was a part of me that was still floating. I don't know. It was very bizarre. And a lot of the other women, I wrote in our group chat because I was like, yo, this is super weird. Like what's going on? And a lot of the other women were like, oh my God, me too. And they were all experiencing it. So I don't know what happened inside of there. I don't know what we accessed or what we touched or what like energetic frequency we downloaded, but like I know for sure something happened there. I FaceTimed my mom after we got out of the pyramid and we got back to the hotel, and she was like at the store running errands out in the world, and it felt so jarring to just like see her like at the cash register because I was just like I was literally staring into my phone like this, like, oh my God, like I don't know what happened. I was just like, I don't know where we went, but we went somewhere. And she was just like, okay, honey, I hope you're good. I'm out shopping. I'm like, what is the real world? I don't even know. But that was definitely a top experience probably of my life. Like there's not many people that can say, you know, they've done this sort of like spiritual throat chakra activation experience privately alone inside the Great Pyramid of Giza, inside the freaking sarcophagus that they laid inside of the king's tomb. Like, wow. So in order for us to talk more about the pyramids, we got to get into some of the theories. Okay. There's a lot of theories about the pyramids. So despite it being really widely accepted and known in air quotes, right? We're going to get into some of the conspiracies that the pyramids were just this kind of like elaborate burial place. Why do I keep saying burial? So weird. Burial. What the hell? People in general believe that the pyramids were this elaborate burial place. But the true origins of the Great Pyramid of Giza are still very, very mysterious. And there's a lot of people that aren't totally sure that that's the truth, right? So it's most commonly believed that this was a tomb of an Egyptian pharaoh, Pharaoh Khufu, even though no remains have ever been found, and it looks totally different than all of the other tombs that were ever created for Egyptian pharaohs. Its construction date was roughly 2550 BCE, and that date is tied to only one piece of evidence. Supposedly, I'm going to say supposedly throughout this whole thing, because again, this isn't the History Channel, but supposedly that date is tied to only one piece of evidence, which is this sort of like, what is it called? A cartouche. This, drawing, this inscription, right? These painted marks within the pyramid's hidden chambers that refer to the fourth dynasty of King Khufu. And this was discovered in 1837, this depiction. And that's how they kind of drew this connection. We're like, oh, this must be who it's from and, why it was built and all that stuff. But there's this guy named Scott Creighton, and he has a book called The Great Pyramid Hoax. And in this book, he explains how the orientation of the Khufu cartouche actually contradicts ancient Egyptian writing convention. And one of the signs is actually believed to be from a later period. So if you're like, what the fuck is that cartouche? You've probably seen one before. It's like an oblong or like oval kind of shape with like a group of like hieroglyphs inside of it. A lot of people will wear them as like a necklace, and you'll do like the hieroglyphs for your name inside of it. It's typically like a cartouche is typically representing the name and title of a monarch. And so they found this cartouche that supposedly was connected to King Khufu, and that's how they determined that this must have been his burial place, and that's what it was for, right? And also, there's the super common theory that the pyramids were built by slaves and whatever, but we'll get into some other theories, okay? So what our Egyptian guides shared with us pretty candidly was that they don't really believe that the Great Pyramid was a tomb, but rather it was, some sort of machine or some sort of like energy conducting device. And that perhaps they were using it to channel energy from other planets or other stars, which honestly makes sense because if you know anything about the alignment of the Great Pyramid, you'll know that it is perfectly aligned with Orion's belt and the star Sirius, which is another sun, right? Our sun is a star, and then there's Sirius, which is another sun, but it's 25 times more powerful than our sun. And what you also might not know, but some of you may know, is that the tip of the Great Pyramid of Giza used to be solid gold, which is a highly conductive material, right? Meaning that electricity can easily flow through it without any resistance. Yeah, there's this theory that, the Great Pyramid was more like a machine or some sort of energy conducting device than an actual burial place. And really what our guides also explained to us was that it's really unlikely that this was used as a tomb because all of the other Egyptian burial places are extremely different. Like they look nothing like this. Think about like the Valley of the Kings where we flew over with the hot air balloons, and then on another day we actually went and visited and went inside of these tombs. And the way that Egyptians buried their royalty was in these hidden places in the sides of mountains so that people wouldn't be able to find them because they buried them with so many of their goods, so much gold. There were so many valuable things inside of those tombs that they didn't want them to be in these really like obvious places that people would try to raid or steal from, like a fucking huge ass pyramid that clearly says, come inside me, there's something important inside, right? But so the traditional like Egyptian tombs are in these like hidden places, and you have to like go into the sides of mountains and try to find them. And also when you go inside of the tombs at Valley of the Kings, all of those burial places are covered, and I mean covered in art and in hieroglyphs and in colors. They did everything in these bright, vibrant colors, and they were so well preserved because they were deep inside of these corridors that were like built into the sides of the mountains that they weren't exposed to oxygen. And they had this technique where they would take beeswax and cover it so that the colors would stay preserved and they wouldn't oxidize. So you go into these tombs and there's colors everywhere, bright, vibrant, blue, yellow, red, and there's hieroglyphs and stories and imagery and art everywhere. And when you go inside of the pyramid, there's nothing. It's completely blank. There's no artwork on the walls. There's no hieroglyphs. There's no storytelling. There's nothing. And so it's very bizarre that this one Egyptian king would have such a different vision for how he wanted to be buried. And it just doesn't all add up. So another interesting thing that happened was we had our private ceremony at the pyramids, but Mel's partner Sean was there, and they also had their baby with them. And so he was oftentimes watching their son. And so we came back the next morning, really, really early morning, to see the Sphinx. And that's also kind of on the Giza Plateau. And so Sean was then able that morning to go and have his time inside of the Great Pyramid before a lot of the public arrived. So it was really, really early morning, and he was able to do that, crawl through the corridors and up into the king's chamber where we had been the night before doing our throat chakra activation. And so he had his own kind of like little visit inside of there. And when he came back, he told us that he had a vision inside of the king's chamber inside the Great Pyramid where he saw these like blue beings constructing the walls of the pyramid. And he was like a man, and he was watching them, and he was thanking them. And they were like these blue beings that were like higher up on the walls, and they were constructing the pyramid. And we were like, oh my God, that's so crazy. Like, how did this vision happen? Like, did you sit down? Were you meditating? And he was like, no, I saw it with my eyes open. I saw it with my eyes open, he says. Like, he just stepped inside of the king's chamber, and it's such like an energetically charged spiritual space that if you're tapped in, if you're fucking open, if you have an open channel, like there's no doubt in my mind that you can start to receive some of the ancient wisdom from this place really quickly. So that was absolutely insane that he saw that vision with his eyes open. And then it sparked a larger conversation that we started having, which was, oh my gosh, could the pyramids have been built by the Atlanteans? And now we were on our own like journey of discovering things. And now afterwards, I've done a bunch of research online, and I'm realizing that so many other people have had these theories long before we ever did. We thought we were like discovering shit. We were like, oh my God, you saw the vision of the blue beings. Like the people from Atlantis, they were blue. Like what if the pyramids were built by Atlanteans? This is a theory that many, 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 many people have already had. This is not original to us, but it is kind of cool to see how like Sean had that vision, and then we're kind of like piecing it together. But so anyway, we started having these conversations about Atlantis, right? The ancient civilization of Atlantis. Now, if you're like, what is that? It's kind of sounds familiar to me, but like, I don't fully remember what it is. Atlanteans are thought to be like an offshoot of humanity. So they're not Homo sapiens, right? They're part of a subspecies known as Homo mermani. Mermaids. Yeah, that's right. Mermaids. And they possess the ability to exist underwater indefinitely, using twin gills on their necks to extract oxygen from the water, and often depicted as being blue and having elf-like ears. Okay. I want you to remember this point about them being blue and having elf-like ears. So I had to gather some deeper information and some articles to help support like this conversation and take us into this theory. So I'm going to read a little bit of what I pulled up about this. So it says, generally, the mythology goes that around 11,500 years ago, the continent of Atlantis was populated by an advanced civilization. The Greek philosopher Plato claimed that, interesting that we know that Plato was an initiate of the Egyptian mysteries also. Hello. So Greek philosopher Plato claimed that Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which some believe were the modern-day Straits of Gibraltar. So Atlantis was this great island in the sea. The island was described as being greater in size than Libya and Asia together, and was powerful enough to be able to attack Europe and Asia. At one point in the distant past, the civilization was wiped out by a great earthquake that turned into a flood, blah, 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 everything goes underwater, okay? From this collapsed civilization, it is believed that the survivors traveled across the globe where they resettled and lived. From these remnants of Atlantis arose the pyramids that are found across the globe. So we're talking about both in Egypt and in Mexico from the Mayan civilization, and that their similarities in architecture can be explained by those two cultures both sharing that common origin of being from the people of Atlantis, okay? The idea that the pyramidal structures were similarly made by the Atlanteans was pondered in the 19th century by Ignatius L. Donnelly, because people are like, why are there pyramids in only certain parts of the world? And how are they so similarly made? And why are they over here in Mexico? And why are they over here in Egypt? And how is this all connected, right? So this idea was first started to be pondered in the 19th century by this guy, Ignatius L. Donnelly. So in 1882, he wrote Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, which proposed that the catastrophic event that ended Atlantis was none other than the Great Flood found in the Bible. Holy shit. Donnelly proposed that the events described by Plato were in fact factual and that humankind first became civilized at Atlantis. He also drew upon the similarities between the Phoenician alphabet, Mayan, and Egyptian hieroglyphs to show that these stemmed all from an original Atlantean alphabet. Okay, so the theories run deep, all right? And we're only just hitting the tip. We're going to go a little bit deeper, okay? So actually, at one point, Elon Musk once tweeted, aliens built the pyramids, and it was retweeted a bunch of times. So that's another kind of, popular quote unquote conspiracy theory that some other beings that were not totally human were responsible for building the pyramids. Because once you go there, honestly, it becomes abundantly clear to you that no human or slave could have ever built this structure. And that's not just from like me being like, oh, it's not possible. Like they've literally tried to reconfigure like how they would have known and how all the positioning of it and the mathematics of it and how many millions of stones it took and how they were all perfectly placed. And I believe they've even done they've tried to do simulations of could we do this again now today in the modern world? And every time there's something off and it's never as perfect as how it was built back then, which makes you wonder, right? If humans today couldn't get it that perfect, then who the fuck is responsible for it, right? So honestly, no shade to Elon Musk with that one, because I could get down with that belief for sure. Some sort of other extraterrestrial, not totally human beings, I believe, were definitely behind the building of the pyramids. Say what you may, okay? So speaking about the perfection and the supreme, astrological and mathematical alignment that these things were built in, we're going to unpack a couple of the kind of mathematical mysteries of the pyramid just to show you how crazy this shit is. So the number pi, we all know the number pi, we learned it in school, 3.14, okay? It's that number that never ends. The number pi was intentionally incorporated into the design of the Great Pyramid, and it's commonly asserted that the perimeter of the base of the Great Pyramid divided by twice its height gives a remarkably accurate estimate of pi, okay? You can Google this if you want to actually see, because it's kind of, I was looking up all these images and I was trying to figure out how I wanted to explain this to you guys, because I'm like, okay, I can tell them about pi, but I want to know the exact measurements and what adds up to what. But it is actually kind of like a complex mathematical equation, especially for a girl that doesn't do any math unless it's girl math. So if you want to, just, Google it. Google number pi, Great Pyramid of Giza, and you'll kind of be able to see these images and they'll show you the calculations and things like that. So anyway, that's perplexing. That's whoa, how did they know that? How were they able to build something in that accuracy that it would work out to be the number pi? How did they even have the knowledge of the number pi? The next mathematical mystery is that the Great Pyramid's latitude, right, where it sits on Earth, is coincidentally the same as the speed of light? ? What the fuck? So the speed of light is 299 million, is it? 792,458 meters per second. Okay. So it's just the same sequence of numbers. The speed of light is 299,792,458. And the exact longitude of the Great Pyramid of Giza is 29.9792458. So the exact same series of numbers. This just feels way too crazy to be a coincidence, especially knowing what we know about ancient Egyptians and these advanced civilizations and how much knowledge they had about the solar system and the stars and the alignment of everything, and how they built these temples specifically so that on the, spring equinox, as the sun would rise, it would directly come through the pillars or the doorway, the archway of this one temple. They had shit figured out. They had shit on lock, okay? How about this one? This one really gets me. The slope of the pyramid works out to be a ratio of 10 to 9. And when the height of the pyramid is then multiplied by 10 to the ninth power, it equals a huge fucking number, 91,840,000 miles, which coincidentally is the distance between the Earth and the sun. And you are telling me, sir, that it is just a burial place for some bougie ass king where no remains have ever been found. No, ma'am, I'm sorry. Like, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. So we have to talk about the gold tip, right? What happened to the gold tip, you might be wondering? Because I told you, the tip of the Great Pyramid used to be solid gold. I believe it like measured 10 meters, solid gold, this huge thing, right? When you go to visit the Great Pyramid today, you'll notice that it's not actually pointed. The other pyramids are pointed, but the Great Pyramid of Giza is not pointed. It actually has a flat top. And that is because the gold capstone is missing. So what happened to that gold tip? Well, according to ancient tradition, the capstone or the top of the pyramid is added to the structure after it's almost complete, and it is supposed to be the most important piece that gives the pyramid its actual purpose. So there have been many speculations and assumptions through the ages as people have tried to understand like what happened to the capstone of the Great Pyramid. So first of all, no one really knows if there was one or where it went. So yeah, there's some people that say like, no, it just never existed. But according to ancient knowledge and legends, if the capstone did not exist, what was the exact purpose of building this huge monument that took so much effort and time? Could it be possible that it was really just a burial place? I don't think so. So I'm going to read you something to help us kind of understand some of these deeper theories about the capstone of the pyramid. It says, since the time of Christ, people who came to look at this huge monument stated, according to some records, that it was missing its capstone. And so the question comes down from centuries because the ancient people knew that there was no purpose to the pyramid without the capstone. Also, it is believed that the capstone was either made of gold or covered by a layer of gold. The reason, that too is an enigma. While mostly researchers believe it was to show the riches and the glory of the pharaohs, others say there was another, more important purpose. The metal absorbed the sun's energies and was used as the main part of the entire structure and made it work like turning the key to a machine. The whole pyramid was actually covered with polished limestone, and with its golden capstone, it shone at night like a bright star on Earth, which would have been visible from space. According to the Egyptian authorities, there seems to be no confusion to the matter, and they claim that the Great Pyramid was built as a tomb for the pharaoh, and the capstone was looted by thieves who also stole many other relics and treasures from the pyramids. But honestly, how are you going to steal a 10-meter solid gold tip off the top of the fucking pyramid? But anyways, here, dear friends, is what we call the more interesting theory, that the Great Giza is much older, that it is not a tomb, but a machine that was used for a much higher and important purpose, and that it was the capstone that turned it on. And here is the basis of that theory. The pyramid has encoded information about the form and function of the universe. The reason it was made with the hardest of stones was because it needed to stand the test of time. There are no hieroglyphs or inscriptions inside the pyramid as thought previously. It was built by an ancient civilization that brought with itself the knowledge that had died with Atlantis, which is the reason that even with today's cutting-edge scientific technology, it is not possible to build one this size and so precise. The length, base, and diameter all represent the geometric measurements of planet Earth, its circumference, diameter, and surface area. The imaginary numbers of Greek pi and phi are both represented here in the measurements of the pyramid. The inner rooms and chambers do not make sense for the tomb theory. In fact, the relation of the rooms to one another, the material used in their construction, and the descending and ascending stairways tell another story. But what story? Researchers can only speculate. So the Great Pyramid at Giza was a machine that cannot work without its capstone. But what did this machine do? That is a 13-acre, 6 million ton mystery, according to experts. Interestingly, The Egyptian government planned to top the Great Pyramid with a golden capstone as part of its turn of the millennium celebrations at Giza. All were excited and looked forward to the ceremony, but then suddenly, without any explanation when the time came, the ministry involved canceled its plan. Why? Did someone warn them of the consequences of turning on the most advanced and oldest machine on the planet? Moreover, they might have also considered that there have been changes over the centuries. Electric lights and bulbs have since been installed, and would that have altered or endangered the workings? They're not telling. But there is a certain form of energy still at the top of the pyramid discovered by Sir William Siemens, a British inventor born in 1823, who climbed to the top with his Arab guides many years ago. So the story goes about this Sir William Siemens. You can also Google this. The story goes that he stood in the center of the very top of the pyramid. So like on top of the pyramid where the golden tip would have used to have been. He stood in the center and spread out his hands and heard kind of like a ringing noise, some sort of like energy happening. And then he wrapped a wet newspaper around a bottle and held it over his head. Apparently the bottle became charged with electricity and sparks started coming out. And when he pointed it towards one of his guides, the man got shocked and fell to the ground. So, there's lots of stories, there's lots of theories, and I'm just not buying the fact that it was a tomb. As we talk more about like the capstone, a lot of us know that there is a depiction of the pyramid on the US dollar bill. So if you're not from the US and you're like, wait, I didn't even know that, you'll want to just like Google an image of an American dollar bill. If you are in the US and you have some cash, just pull out a dollar bill and look at it because it's really interesting. So I've always known that there's a pyramid on the dollar bill, but what I never really focused on or looked at or paid attention to was the fact that like the top piece of the pyramid, so that what would have been like that top golden capstone piece, it's literally lifted off of the pyramid and it's levitating above it, right? First of all, like why the fuck is there even a pyramid on the American money to begin with? Like why are we not asking that question? That's bizarre, right? But why is the capstone that was supposedly looted by thieves levitating off of the pyramid on the dollar bill? Almost like showing us in plain sight that someone knows that it was once there, and yes, indeed, it is now detached from the base of the pyramid and like it's somewhere, right? Why is it levitating? And why inside of that levitating capstone is there none other than the all-seeing eye, right? We've all seen this image before. It's the eye inside of that triangle. So this is called the Eye of Providence, also known as the all-seeing eye of God. And it's often shown as like a human eye surrounded by some sort of triangle and then rays of light or rays of glory, as they call it when it's more used in like religious contexts. But this is often seen as like a symbol for knowledge, Trinity, or for a God that sees all. And what I think is cool to think about with this is the rays of light, right? It's always surrounded by these rays of light. And that connects to the latitude of the pyramid equaling the speed of light, the height of the pyramid correlating to the distance between the earth and the sun, aka the source of light, the positioning of the pyramid being in alignment with star Sirius, which is the brightest source of light in the night sky. And then also the fact that this is a symbol of Trinity. There's 3 pyramids on the Giza Plateau. I don't know. A lot of things are just kind of like they're connecting. Like there's got to be a larger story here. And a lot of us know that the all-seeing eye was also a symbol of the early Freemasons, who are often said to be connected with the Illuminati. Who are the Freemasons? We're not going to go too deep into it, but essentially they are like a fraternal group, so men only, of stonemasons. They are known as the largest worldwide secret society. It's an oath-bound society, often devoted to fellowship, moral discipline, mutual assistance, and they are known to kind of conceal their rituals, customs, and activities from the public. If you Google Illuminati symbol and then you Google Masonic symbols, you'll see a lot of very similar symbolism. And a lot of that connects to what you're seeing on the dollar bill and the story about the missing capstone from the pyramid. So yeah, our guides also told us about theories that there is more of the pyramid underground than what we can see above ground, which is interesting. So some people believe that the pyramid is kind of like an iceberg in that we can only see a small percentage of it above ground and there's actually quite a lot more below ground. But then also some people believe that the part of the pyramid that's underneath the ground is actually in inverted. So it's not like the pyramid goes deeper and wider in the ground. It's actually like an upside down pyramid underneath the one that we see above ground. And you'll actually see that depicted in those Masonic symbols. If you do the Googling of like Illuminati symbols, Masonic symbols, you'll oftentimes see like what looks like the outline of a pyramid and then an inverted one below it, and then like the eye in the middle or something like that. So I don't have any answers. I don't fucking know. All I know is that it's a trip, it's wild, and my mind was freaking blown. So yeah, I'm not sure how open-minded you guys are, but if we want to go all the way there, I think we might as well. We're already this far. So if you want to know like what I think, I don't have any of the answers, but I really do believe that some of the most powerful people on the planet for sure know what the pyramid was really used for. They know what happened to the missing capstone, and they've kind of helped craft a narrative that makes enough sense that most people, even, historians and researchers, won't really question it, because higher levels of information have always been protected from the public, right? There always have and always will be things that we don't know that the people in high places do, right? There's literally no reason for us to believe that our government would ever tell us everything that they know or be 100% open, honest, and transparent with us as the public, because that would create so much chaos and probably anarchy in society, right? And a government's job, besides to serve the people, no matter how well or, poorly they actually execute on that, is to establish order, right? And long before we had governments to establish order, we had religion. And organized religions were the original form of establishing order among the people, right? By providing them with a set of rules and beliefs to live by, instilling fear about what would happen if they didn't follow those rules, and to make sure that they had an example of what it meant to be a good person that they could model after and follow. So I don't know, like mainstream narratives in society, I think, are what keep us in order and keep us in check, and we definitely need them. And I'm not saying that all conspiracies are true. I'm not one of those people either. I'm just saying that I think that you would be silly not to see that there is a lot in this world that people of power have a vested interest in you not knowing or understanding, because you are easier to tame and control when you just believe what you're told. And I think once you've gone through a spiritual awakening of any kind, your consciousness becomes so expanded that you just can't unsee the facts, and you can't unsee that there is so much more going on in this earthly realm than just what meets the eye, right? So even just the simple fact that like the human eye can only see less than 1% of the visible light spectrum, that's facts. That's right. The human eye can only see less than 1% of the visible light spectrum. Like that alone should be enough proof that there is so much shit happening right now that we just cannot see. And I'm honestly just perplexed by how people could believe that, energies aren't influencing us all the time, and that there's not some sort of higher power or divine order, that the planets are not at all affecting us, and that the spirit realm is not real, and that ghosts and aliens don't exist, that your soul has never been here before, that everything you read in a history book or hear on the news is the whole truth and nothing but the truth, that there's not a million more magical, mystical secrets living among us. Like, wake up, friends. Are you for real right now? Like, it's just wild to me that people could be that simple-minded. But I guess everyone is on their own timeline, right? But that's just my 2 cents. So if you are here for the woo, if we haven't gone deep enough into the woo yet, why don't we talk about my psychic reading before Egypt and the initiation that I had with an Egyptian goddess while I was there. All right, here we go.